If you've ridden enough coasters, you start gaining an understanding on what to expect. That coaster is going to be great. That one's going to suck. That one's going to be mild or intense. And that one's going to knock my teeth out. Well, sometimes you're just flat wrong. In this video, I want to look at 15 coasters where I was prepping for the worst, or coasters that buck the trend of a negative stereotype and provide a pleasant ride experience. These are the most surprisingly smooth coasters I've ever ridden. A few honorable mentions for the list. 2 ancient wooden coasters, Jackrabbit at Kennywood and Classic Coaster at the Washington State Fair, and 1 newer wooden coaster, Twister 2 at Elitch Gardens, just because it looks so janky, but the ride itself was pretty smooth. Blue Hawk's renovation in 2016 seems to have done a world of good, obviously because it got new trains, but I didn't even feel any roughness when I rode it in 2018 and 2019, despite its horrible reputation as Ninja. And finally, 2 Arrows. Gemini hasn't always been the smoothest experience, but Cedar Point maintains this coaster pretty well, and my amazing rides in 2018 were a big surprise, after the coaster beat me up in 2016. Also, Viper at Magic Mountain. Please don't turn the video off, it's just an honorable mention. I honestly think it's one of the smoother coasters in the park, though that may be an unpopular opinion. And by maybe, I mean it is. Number 15, Sidewinder at Hershey Park. Oh look, another boomerang. It's not like I hadn't ridden a dozen of these on my road trip before I even got to Hershey Park. Some were good, some were not, but Sidewinder was the first one that I rode with new trains and with the best restraints, and that made all the difference in the world. No more defensive riding, just to squeeze out an enjoyable ride on a boomerang. You can just sit back and enjoy all the good forces it has to offer. If these parks are going to keep their boomerangs around, it would be worth renovating it, like Hershey Park did with Sidewinder. Number 14, Roller Coaster at Lagoon. When I rode this in 2017 for the first time, I took a look at its opening date and saw 1921. Awesome. This is gonna hurt. But to my surprise, the roughness wasn't that bad. It was definitely worth a re-ride, since it also had some very solid airtime. I came back to the park in 2019, and by then, they got some brand new Millennium Flyer trains from GCI, and lo and behold, the ride is even smoother. It's celebrating 100 years in 2021, and it's probably in the top half of the smoothest wooden coasters I've ridden. Number 13, Tennessee Tornado at Dollywood. I see Aero Looper, I'm thinking shaky and rough. But this isn't your grandfather's Aero Looper. This one only dates back to 1999. And needless to say, Aero figured something out by then. It's a shame that this was their last looping coaster. It would have been interesting to see how many of these parks would have ordered one had they not gone bankrupt. Aero set up Dollywood for success, but props to Dollywood for keeping this coaster running smooth more than 20 years later. Number 12, Thunder Run at Kentucky Kingdom. Din wooden coasters don't have the best reputation. They didn't make a lot of coasters to begin with, and there aren't too many left. Of the 10, 3 were scrapped, and 3 were turned into RMC hybrids. Thunder Run is their best coaster in my opinion. Not only is it smooth, it's got a great layout in the first half. Not sure what happened in the second half. It's basically straight track, but it doesn't take away from the ride's overall smooth experience. Good on Kentucky Kingdom for keeping this coaster running great. Darien Lake, take note. Number 11, Comet at Hershey Park. Old wooden coasters can be hit or miss. When you look at another wooden coaster at the park that's literally 50 years newer, Wildcat, it makes you wonder how Comet could be so smooth, while it seems like Wildcat is on square wheels. Built in 1946, Comet glides on its track. There's no weird jackhammering or bouncing at the bottom of the drops, like with Wildcat at Frontier City, and it has good airtime to go along with it. Number 10, Canyon Blaster at the Adventure Dome. I don't think that you can underestimate the effect that climate control has on a coaster. Where other Aero Loopers from the early 90s are not smooth at all, Canyon Blaster is butter smooth, with a rapid-fire intense layout. Because it's under a dome, it's always a comfortable temperature. It's never exposed to the blazing sun or the rain or the snow, and I think that helps keep the track in good shape, and makes this probably the smoothest Aero coaster I've ever ridden. Number 9, Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Speaking of Aero coasters, this is one of the bigger ones, and one of the older ones, built in 1978. With that in mind, I rode this in 2008 and I thought it was great. And then I rode again in 2019, and I still thought it was perfectly smooth. What is Busch Gardens doing right, compared to, say, Kings Island, with a similar Aero with Vortex, which after 2 rides, you felt like you had more than enough. This makes me think that Nessie still has a long future at the park, as long as they can keep it running as it is now. Number 8, Wild One at Six Flags America. This PTC wooden coaster has 3 things going against it. It's old, 104 years old in 2021. It's relocated, and those pieces don't always fit together as well as they once did when you take it apart. And finally, it's owned by Six Flags, who operate a much newer wooden coaster next door, which is one of the roughest pieces of crap I've ever ridden. All that being said, Wild One is surprisingly smooth. It may not be the smoothest coaster in the world, or even in the park, but there's nothing to complain about here, given the circumstances. Number 7. Phoenix at Knoebels. Similar story to Wild One. Old, but not quite as old as Wild One, only dating back to 1948. But it's also relocated. It has the benefit of being owned by Knoebels, who takes great care of their coasters, and that makes Phoenix a glossy, smooth wooden coaster. It's ranked higher than Wild One because it's even smoother. Not even a hint of roughness in my experience. So you can sit back in your PTC train with your buzz bar and enjoy all those drops and all the airtime Phoenix has to offer. Number 6. Hoosier Hurricane at Indiana Beach. Here's one where I heard nothing but horror stories. One of the worst wooden coasters in the country. It sounded awful. Indiana Beach announced its permanent closure in 2020, but was rescued by Gene Staples. And prior to its grand reopening, Hoosier Hurricane got a full retracking on that first drop. That was a good sign, but what about the rest of the ride? I got to ride this in the front and the back, and I was stunned with how smooth it was. The ride didn't really pull any forces, but if you just want an enjoyable out and back wooden coaster, that's what you got with Hoosier Hurricane. No pain, no defensive riding. I was very impressed with how well it was running, and hopefully it could stay that way. Number 5. Viper at Six Flags Great America. I rode this once, backwards, in 2013, and it wasn't all that pleasant. When I came back to the park in 2016, I was ready for a one and done experience, and figured I was gonna get my butt kicked. This time, the trains were facing forward, and I had one of the most surprisingly great coaster experiences of my life. This Cyclone replica was nothing like Cyclone at Magic Mountain. It was smooth and had several pops of solid airtime. I rode it again backwards in 2017, and I thought it was smooth there also. I don't know what happened in 2013, but the park has been doing a great job keeping Viper running well. Number 4. Cyclone at Luna Park on Coney Island. We talked about how the coaster inspired by Cyclone was smooth, but how about the original? It dates back to 1927, sits right there on the beach, and it's clear that it's taken great care of. I rode this in 2008, and again in 2015, and even though the track profiling is a little funky, it's not a rough ride at all. You could include the other old seaside wooden coasters here also, the Giant Dipper at Belmont Park and Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk in California. Very similar experiences, though I think the Cyclone is a little more of an extreme ride than the others. Number 3. Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. One of the reasons that Steel Phantom closed down in 2000 was because it was a rough ride. Morgan took this massive 10-year-old Aero Looper and turned it into a hypercoaster, taking out the inversions and adjusting the second half, but leaving the rest of the ride intact. It doesn't sound like that would turn a rough and painful ride into one of the smoothest rides I've ever been on, but here we are. The smoothness is especially noticeable and appreciated at the bottom of that 228-foot drop, when the train is hauling at 85 miles per hour. There isn't even a hint of a rattle, and at that speed, any kind of shakiness would wreak havoc on your head. So great job Morgan, and Kennywood for the good maintenance. Number 2. Legend at Holiday World, circa 2020. I have videos on my channel talking about how awful my rides on Legend were in 2016 and 2018. In 2018, I got jackhammered harder than I've ever felt on any coaster. In 2016, the ride was just coming off a retrack, and it was still bad. I didn't think there was any hope for Legend, and then I rode it during Hollywood Nights in 2020, just to get my one ride on it, just because I like getting the experience each time I go. I was preparing to get destroyed, as usual, but what I got was a spectacular ride. Smooth, intense, and even some airtime, even though the Legend is not built for that. I don't know if this really counts for this list, because I'm talking about one experience, rather than the coaster as a whole. But in terms of being surprised by smoothness, this was about as surprised as I've ever been. Number 1. Thunderbolt at Kennywood. A little backstory here. Before I got to Kennywood, we had been around quite a bit. Canada's Wonderland, Darien Lake, Waldemere, Conneaut Lake Park. This meant I just rode Wild Beast, Mighty Canadian Mindbuster, Predator. Even Ravine Flyer 2 shook me around a little bit. And the kicker was Blue Streak, which was so rough that it seemed dangerous. So the next park on the list was Kennywood, home of 3 wooden coasters built in the 1920s. And I was kind of dreading getting beaten up even more. My first ride of the day was on Thunderbolt, starting its life in 1924, but being overhauled and expanded in 1968. I was shocked at how smooth this thing was from start to finish, as was Jackrabbit, as was Racer, as was Phantom's Revenge. People like to trash Kennywood sometimes for their operations, and based on my one trip there, I can see why. But you can't complain about the way they maintain their rides. Thunderbolt being my first ride of the day, and being the biggest wooden coaster in the park, gave me the biggest surprise. And it was such a refreshing experience to ride a smooth old wooden coaster after getting my brain turned into mush over the past week. So that's it for my surprisingly smooth coaster experiences. Let me know what you think of the list, and if you have any experiences like this to share, sound off in the comments below. I'll also be looking at the top 15 coasters that were surprisingly rough, so stay tuned for that video soon. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like, and subscribe if you're new here and love coasters. And if you want to join my Discord server and talk with other fans of the channel, or check out my second channel, where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, those links are down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.